have been these key welfare indicator guides. The authors of these guides, as Karen will tell you, are our poultry health and welfare committees, and Karen was the chair of the broiler subcommittee, so she is the perfect person to give you all those great quick tips about the KWI guides for broilers. Karen?
Thanks, Elena. No matter where you are around the world, a smaller and smaller percentage of the population is involved in food production. Now, obviously, that's different in different countries, but as a trend, I think it's moving that direction. But I think what is true is that consumers everywhere want to know how their food is grown. And when we're talking about animal protein, I think they want to know that the animals are being cared for. And I think that's important. And I think another important thing that we all need to understand is that ultimately consumers want to know that we as producers care about the animals that we grow for food. And key welfare indicators, I think, will be a really good way to communicate with customers and the end consumer about the continuous improvement in animal welfare that key welfare indicators can provide. Next slide, please. So let's back up and we'll start with, how do we define animal welfare? Well, the World Organization on Animal Health describes it as the physical and mental state of an animal in relation to the conditions in which it lives, okay? But providing animal care, as all of you know, is complex, and it requires different things for different species, or it requires different things for different ages within the same species. And there can be differences involved in the environment in which they're grown. However, the IPWA, or the International Poultry Welfare Alliance, recognizes that there are different definitions and standards for poultry welfare, but we believe that there is a holistic approach, meaning how do we wrap this all up for everybody? And that is how we began the development of the KWI guides. And I really believe that the KWIs will help improve the overall welfare and welfare outcomes of poultry around the world. So what are key welfare indicators? Well, as we mentioned, every species will have a unique set of key welfare indicators that'll really help us get at the state of the animals, and help drive continuous improvement. But even more specifically, we're going to see different KWIs, for example, for pullets and breeders than we do for broilers. So there may be some that are very similar, but because of their age and because of their function, there's likely to be an additional set of key welfare indicators. Key welfare indicators should be easy to measure. All right, we want to be able to collect the data simply. Doesn't take all day to collect it, and we certainly don't want to have an impact on the animal if we're measuring those, for instance, in a house. So ease of measurement is really important. It has to be consistent across observers. So we want every person that's listening to this to understand key welfare indicators, how you would collect that information and record it, and that it would be all of it, we would all agree in those observations. And then most importantly, it has to be significant to the animal's welfare. I know everyone here is familiar with Temple Grandin, and Temple reminds us that we cannot manage what we don't measure. So the real way that we can get better is to monitor and manage the data so that we can know where we are, know where we're going, and I think KWIs will give us an opportunity to do that. KWI should also be consistent across all housing systems and sizes. So whether you're talking about mega houses or small houses, big farms or small farms, the KWIs again should be consistent. And they should be accessible and understandable by those people that are managing the animals. Now, They may not be the ones that are collecting the KWIs, but it's really important that the caretakers understand that their actions can have an impact on KWIs, either negatively or positively. So I think it's really important that this becomes a part of the caretaking culture to understand what information is being collected, how I can influence that information. And that's an important part of driving continuous improvement. KWIs also need to be science-based. I think that that's really important. But most importantly, they really need to be outcome-based, meaning the measurements that we take directly reflect on the impact to the animal. It's also important to know what KWIs are not. So KWIs in the guide that IPWA has prepared are not prescriptive and they're not standards. So we're not going to say you need to be at this percentage of foot pad lesions, or you need to be at this percentage of hock burns. So we're going to understand why those different KWIs are important and allow people to benchmark and drive continuous improvement. They're not based on any specific region or housing type. So a lot of work went into making sure that the KWI guides can be used globally. They're not based on theories. Again, they have to be backed by science. And we put a lot of information in the guide to not only give you plenty of information around why that KWI is important, but also the scientific references so that you can actually learn even more if you want to. And they're not resource-based and they're not input-based. So we're not just saying, you know, if you count this many animals or if you count this size house or something like that, that's a KWI. No, we're talking about how we can relate the information directly to the impact it has on the animal. And one of the problems with input-based or input-based resources is that oftentimes they tell us how many birds we can put in a house based on the area of the house, but it doesn't give any credit to the stockmanship that's required to have good key welfare indicators at the end of the flock. So you can tell that the difference between input and output, we want to know the experience that the animals had, not just check a box by saying, if we put this many in the house, everything will be fine, because that's not, as you all know, how it's going to work. So why is the distinction important between input and output KWIs? Well, as I mentioned, input changes to the production system just don't guarantee improvements in welfare. And I think it's always important to understand the influence that stockmanship by the growers, by the caretakers, is so critical to the welfare outcomes of the broilers, and that can never be discounted. And that probably has the biggest impact on the experience that the broilers have in the house, is this idea of stockmanship. And that's, again, why it's so important that those caretakers understand what we're measuring, why we're measuring it, and how they can impact it and be a strong part of driving that continuous improvement. Again, they may not be collecting the numbers, but they need to know how their management can have a positive impact on the flock. Input changes also provide a message to producers that if you're compliant with input, so if I just put in this many birds or I just use this kind of breed, that everything will be okay and guarantee good welfare. And I think we all understand that that's not the case. So what was the goal of the KWI guides? There was a tremendous amount of work that went into creating the guides. And why did IPWA think that this was a monumental task, and why was it so important? We really wanted to encourage the global poultry industry to measure and share their progress using KWIs throughout the entire poultry supply chain. So you'll find KWIs for pullets, breeders, observations on the farm, transportation, and processing. We also think that a consistent reference for the supply chain and all stakeholders. So we have a lot of customers in the industry in the US that are partnering with producers to collect and monitor KWIs. And I think that this really helps in transparency, and it really becomes a partnership on continuous improvement. And I think it's leading edge information on what KWIs can drive continuous improvement in welfare. I think that's really important as well. So here's the key welfare indicator, the KWI guides. I would recommend that you go to the IPWA website and check them out. We're talking specifically about breeders today, but you can see that we've covered layers, broilers, and turkeys. But it's also important to know that, and to remember that the KWI guides are not a set of requirements. So they're not going to tell you that if you reach this level, everything will be fine. They are flexible and customizable. So if there's a way that works better for your organization, I think that that's perfectly acceptable. And they're available for anyone to use. You can download them, you can make them available for all of the caretakers and team members that you have. And they're a great reference for farms, hatcheries, processing, and transportation. There's a lot of good resource information, background information in there that really explains why each of the KWIs is so important to improving welfare. And the use of the KWIs will align with your goals and applicable standards and guidelines. So we're all interested in improving welfare, and the KWIs, I think, can be an important part of that. So let's just kind of give an example of what the guide will look like. And so for this example, we'll use air quality, and this happens to be one out of the turkey KWI. But as you can see here, we're going to provide you with the definition of the KWI, the reasoning why it's so important, ideas on how to measure it. Sometimes there's one way, sometimes there's multiple ways that you can use to measure that KWI. And then there's going to be information about the implementation. So we set it up so that if some of these KWIs are new to you, you may want to start with the tier 1 action and get started there. As you find that to be a valuable KWI, you may want to continue into some more detailed implementation and measurements. So tremendous amount of information available. So this is what the guide looks like, and you can see that there's information on the farm for processing, transport and handling, mortality, and hatchery. So we've got everything in the guide that's covered. So you can look through different sections, you can find the parts that are specific for you. And I think it's also important to say that not every location is going to use every single KWI, but you can work with your teams to determine which of those KWIs are going to be most appropriate for your location and help drive improvement in welfare in those areas that you're really focused on. So again, let's look at some of the detail here on the information that's provided. So for this case, we're going to talk about litter quality. So you can see that there's a lot of information here as to why litter is important and how litter can impact welfare and why it's important that it is used as a KWI. It's a good one that will tell us a lot about some of the health and welfare aspects of the birds going forward. So I think litter is one KWI that we should all focus on. So we're going to have definitions about how the KWI would work for using it for measuring litter. And we're going to give you information on the observation. And then we're going to demonstrate how you would make that measurement and record that measurement. So we'll take multiple measurements in a house, record those, and create enough information that we can say, hey, our litter is in pretty good shape as we go forward. Or we can say, you know, this is an area where we really need to focus on. And there'll be information in the guide to say, you know, if I need to improve it, here's some places that I can go to get that information as well. And then there's references for learning more information about it. So we're also going to share with you exactly where to start. So you can start with, you know, start at the very beginning, and then you can move forward. And then if you want to improve on that measurement, we've provided even more additional information. So let's talk about the scope of the KWI guides and what's included in the different sections. So broiler welfare outcomes that can be measured and drive continuous improvement. And I think that we can't say that enough, that all of these KWIs have been included in the guide specifically so that they can be easily measured, that they can be measured consistently by multiple people, and ultimately they will drive continuous improvement. So let's think about the hatchery. I think some of the most important hatchery outcomes that you'll find in the guide are cull rate, injury monitoring, chicks on the floor, and a discussion on monitoring chick comfort while they're in the hatchery and waiting to be loaded on the truck. Broiler outcomes that can be measured and drive continuous improvement on the farm include paw scores, hawk burns, and gate scores. Now, those three are really important as part of our an outcome of litter management. So I think that those things are tied really closely together. And oftentimes these KWIs, even though that's a farm outcome, can easily be measured at the plant. So we can think about doing them at the farm, but it's difficult to handle those birds to get the sample. So even though that's a farm outcome, typically we measure those at the plant. Paw scores, obviously, litter management plays a strong role in paw scores. Hawk burns is similar, but can also be an indication of bird activity or even bird inactivity. How much are they sitting in the litter? And then, of course, gate score would certainly have to do with leg health and monitoring leg health. Mortality, culls, and cull verification are KWIs that can easily be collected at the farm level. And I think that culls is an important measure that growers are identifying birds that aren't going to thrive in the system and humanely euthanizing them, removing them from the flock, rather than waiting until they become mortality. And I think the cull verification KWI is also very important because that way we can, as an observer, so the person that's assigned to do that KWI can really then understand that the recording of mortality and the recording of culls is accomplishing what we want. So cull verification would be simply going in and monitoring the number of birds that aren't going to thrive, can't access feed and water. And we would hope that that would substantiate the fact that the grower is doing a great job of identifying those culls and removing them from the flock. We've already talked about litter quality. Ammonia level is another one that's can be an important KWI, and oftentimes is also tied to litter quality. and then mobility assessment. So, how well are the birds moving? And again, are we doing a good job of culling? When we think about transportation and handling, it's only a small part of the time of the birds' life, but it certainly is an important one because there's an awful lot of things that are happening and we want to try to minimize any negative outcomes. So the most important KWIs that are measured during this important period of time is DOAs, or dead on arrivals. And then we need to understand what that number is, but then start to understand, is that farm related? Is it handling related? Or is there something happening at the plant that's contributing to that number? Obviously, that's an important KWI. And then, of course, damaged wings and damaged legs is not only an economic issue, but is a real indication that there's a handling opportunity somewhere in the process of catching, unloading, and during the processing component there. And legs would be a similar KWI. And then when we think about the plant, really some important KWIs here that we need to think about. So unloading procedures. Our unloading procedures have a lot to do with handling, making sure that the birds are handled properly, and at the same time that we aren't creating some type of a negative impact even for meat quality. So we're going to think about shackling efficiency, making sure that all birds are shackled properly and that they're handled correctly during that period of time. Stunning efficiency is a real important one. Whether you're using electrical stunning or CO2 stunning, we want to be the best of the best in rendering those birds insensible prior to slaughter. So I think that that's one that we should all focus on. And that one really helps us understand our whole process, making sure that we understand how the equipment that we have is managed to deliver on that stunning efficiency. And I think we can make real progress there. And this one not only tells us about stunning efficiency, which from a welfare perspective is critical, but also can be part of the KWI involved in wing damage as well. So oftentimes these KWIs are linked, and by improving things in one area, we definitely see an improvement in others. And then, of course, slaughter efficiency. That goes without saying that that's a KWI that should be performed and recorded, and the outcome should be at a very, very high level. So I hope I've given you a little bit of a peek into the KWI guides and the information that IPWA has spent a tremendous amount of time putting together. And we really believe that this knowledge will drive initiatives throughout the entire supply chain and globally that will improve welfare. And as we do that, we'll drive initiatives that make an improvement in the industry. It's going to help us from a production standpoint. It's going to certainly help us from a welfare perspective. And it's really going to provide transparency so that our customers and our consumers understand what good welfare looks like. And so really at the peak of this triangle, it's not only a win-win, but it's really a win-win-win. So it's good for the birds, it's good for the industry, and it's really beneficial to customers and consumers to begin to understand that we do care for the animals that we raise, and that we can demonstrate that by using key welfare indicators to drive continuous improvement. So that's really kind of a sneak peek into the KWI guides. I hope that it's enough to really get you interested in going to the website at poultrywelfare.org. downloading those guides, sharing them with your team, and really developing a program that will be unique to your location, to your situation, and will be successful in improving animal welfare. And with that, I would be happy to entertain any questions.
Well, first of all, Karen, thank you very much for your explanation. If someone wants to, we have a couple more minutes. If somebody has some question, there is a box, say Q&A. Karen will be more than happy to answer them. But I have a couple questions, Karen. And first of all, I'm very impressed, and I really need to acknowledge the work that is in these guys. And like you say, it's a massive information putting together these guides. So Karen, I have a question. So if a company wants to start from scratch, let's say, because these videos are gonna be seen worldwide, I know that maybe you are more focused in the USA, if I'm not wrong. But if a company wants to start a protocol of starting a welfare initiative, what will be the recommendation? There are companies that they can guide them, or where a company can start to moving forward in this direction to implement the guides.
Using the guides, yeah, no, that's a great question. I really think the first thing to do is to become familiar with the information that's shared in the guide. And then look at each of the sections. So if we're talking specifically about broilers, we'll think about the hatchery, the farm, transportation, and the plant. And then I would go through and think about how those key welfare indicators relate to your current data. So is there an area that you feel like you're maybe struggling in? So maybe at the farm, you want to see better litter conditions. Then I would use the key welfare indicators around that parameter. So I would think about monitoring litter, and I would also think about monitoring paw scores. And then I think that gives you the opportunity to have a baseline that tells you how big of an impact is that in your situation. And I think there's great information and resources in there to help you understand how to go to the next step, and then collect the data, and then work with team members, making sure that everybody understands the significance of why this is important, what the positive impact will be, and then implement the changes that you really believe will make an improvement. And I think everybody loves to see a graph with lines going up, because that's most always is really good. And so I think people become really interested in seeing that improvement, and they become really innovative and creative and willing to do that that research and look for those answers to help drive that. So I would look for 2 or 3 of the KWIs that really resonate, that you can relate to, and that will help you in the areas that you may be struggling with. So if you want to think about, so litter, I think is a really good one. Paw scores, I think is really a good place to start. In the plant, we talk about transportation and handling. I think wings is one that we can really focus on and think about, and that gives you the opportunity to say, well, this is where we are, this is where we'd like to be, and then the guide will provide you with some ways to dig into understanding if it's a handling issue, or if it's an unloading issue, or if it's something that's happening during processing. So then you can identify which of those areas is contributing the most to the problem, and then focus on driving the continuous improvement there. So I think it's going to be individual and unique. But I think that the way that the guide is set up, that it's pretty easy to identify which of the KWIs you would want to start with. And as you see improvement and gain that confidence in the ability to drive improvement, then you can think about which other KWIs might also provide additional continuous improvement in each of those sections. I wouldn't want anybody to think that they have to take the guide and start with everything. That's way too big of a bite. So I would look at 1 or 2 KWIs in each section. Can I do that? Can I show improvement? And then from that, everybody begins to understand the significance and the power. And then you can add those in that are kind of the next ones that are most relevant to your situation. So that was a lot. I hope that helped.
Yeah. Karen, I have a lot of questions, but here we have a question from Tarek Ahmed. He say, thank you, Karen, so much for your presentation. Would you please tell me the DOA percentage and it differ from winter to summer?
Yep, that's a great question. But you know what? I can't give you a DOA number because the guides aren't prescriptive. So what I would suggest is that you understand where your DOA number is, and then think about, is it a number that needs to improve? And if it is, then I would look to the guide for the information that's shared there as to how do I dig into a DOA number and look for ways to drive improvement. And I think there can be seasonal differences in DOA numbers, but that's an indication that we need to be thinking about ways to mitigate those seasonal differences. So if I'm thinking that summer's really hot and my DOAs go up, and I'm using it as a KWI, and consistently that KWI increases in the summertime, then I think you look for those resources in the KWI guide that will help direct you to ways to reduce DOAs in the summertime. And that's likely all going to be about heat mitigation. Yep, absolutely. So then we can get creative on, we understand the problem, it's higher when it's hot, and as a team, what are those things that we can do to mitigate that? And then you see the success of your planning by the improvement in that key welfare indicator.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. One more question for me, Karen. In the USA, who is leading this regulation? Is the government, associations, individual producers? Who is handling the ruling of this?
Oh, good question. Good question. There's really differences globally on welfare regulations and maybe even welfare standards. The International Poultry Welfare Alliance, though, doesn't set the standards. We've just provided information to help get better. So I would say in the US, we have fewer welfare regulations. We have very strict regulations, government regulations, especially around processing and activities at the plant that have to do with slaughter.
Okay.
But when we get farther into the plants, that really becomes information that comes from the industry. And more, as we talked about, that customers are demanding to see improvement in all of those welfare indicators at the farm. So the US may be pretty lax in terms of regulation, but it really doesn't matter if you're highly regulated or if you're not. We're all in this together to improve welfare. And there would not be any regulation, I can't imagine, that would prevent you or inhibit you from using the KWI guide to improve the situation from where you are now to where, as a company, you think you need to be. And I think that that's the real power of the guide, that irregardless of where you are globally, it can be very, very impactful if you implement those KWIs that are important to you and you manage those, and the team begins to understand the activities that drive that KWI in the direction that you're focused on. And that can happen irregardless of regulation. There should not be anything in the guide that would be conflicting with any local or regional regulations. But there's always a but. You know, if there is something, you would obviously need to be aware of it. But I can't imagine there in any case that that this wouldn't fit into any situation globally.
Yeah, completely agree, Karen. And I think that maybe that's one of our main goals here, doing these partnerships, is providing awareness and promoting a global movement to do our homework regarding welfare. And you mentioned something about consumers. Sadly, is my thinking. Sadly, we have in the news more, let's say, media against how we, because we are in this industry, how we produce, how we raise chicken, how we slaughter chicken, and there is a bad marketing in the people that is not in the industry. So I think that providing this information, providing awareness, is something that can help and is something that we need to keep doing, to provide that information to general people that is not in the industry.
That's exactly
Right?
right. I think you're spot on. And I think that another one of the powers of the KWI guides is to increase transparency and help combat exactly what you're talking about. And so individual companies can share their KWIs as they feel is right for them, as part of a transparency to help educate consumers that in fact the industry is doing a good job, that they're striving for continuous improvement, and we maybe weren't as good yesterday, but we'll be better tomorrow. And I think that can be a really strong story. And the other thing about the guides is if we all follow the guides, then it lifts everybody up the same way, because we're all focused on making improvements using the same observations to do that. So consistently, we can demonstrate that as an industry, we're moving in the right direction. And I think this idea of transparency is very important. And I think what we like to say in the United States industry is that it's important to tell our story, because if we don't, somebody else will tell it. And KWI can be an important part of that story.
Yeah, completely agree, Karen. So if we don't have any more questions, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I think we can talk for more time, but I think we cover our time, 45 minutes. So if there is any more question, we just want to share to you that also these guys are in Spanish, and in the webpage, also you have learning models that you can go there and have more information. And as I mentioned before, this is the first presentation. We're planning to do the breeder, the turkey, and we have more material to share. So Karen, thank you very much for your input. When we share this information, we will share your social media if somebody wants to reach you or have any other contact. Elena, thank you very much for providing this opportunity to this collaboration. Okay?
Thanks, everybody, and I hope you enjoy reading through the guides and using them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, everybody. And let's see you in the next one. Bye-bye.